Hello all my painting friends. Tonight we're going to be painting this set of boots from Diverse Woodworking. Now I've decided to make mine look like cowboy boots. And I doodled out a little idea on my iPad. I'm sorry, my phone keeps wanting to flip it. Anyway, there is the basic idea of what I want to do tonight. So I'm going to have it sitting over here to the side so I can kind of keep an eye on my plan. And I'm going to use a tan color, a black, and a burnt umber, and also some teal. I'm going to get that sit out here and ready, but what I need to do first is actually use my chalk and trace on my design. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And while I'm doing that, I'll talk to you guys about Diverse Woodworking's Design by Line items. So if you guys wanted to paint something like this, but you didn't want to try to draw it on or come up with your own design, you can go on to their website and you can find these items that we've got painted here. You can find most of them as Design by Line. And what that means is it's going to come out to you once you order it. With the design already etched into the wood. So all you have to do is paint it. So you have that advantage going for you guys. Unless you just want to try to eyeball it and do it yourself, then you are more than welcome to. As you can see here, I'm just outlining this with chalk to give myself a guide. And the reason I use chalk is because of this right here. If I decide I don't like it, I can just erase over it real quick and start over. And I wanted that to have a little bit of a better curve to it, so we're going to start over. Now, the only problem I have with chalk is I have a little bit more trouble getting it to go onto the wood, so sometimes that's a little frustrating, but other than that, chalk works great. Alright, so I've got my design down, the basics of my design. So now I can do my base coats, and we'll go ahead and get started. We're going to pick up this tan. I'm using this medium-sized flat brush, but you could use a larger brush if you want to. I'm just using this one because it's what I had handy. I'm going to follow around these chalk lines and then just fill in this entire top part of my boot. So I'm going to go ahead and speed up the video a little bit just to save time, and I'll catch you back up with you as soon as I get done. See, that was easy as pie. Now we're done with that. We're going to pick up this burnt umber, and I'm going to paint the bottom half of the boot. And again, this is just the base coat. We're going to come back in with our details in a little bit once that base coat's dry. Just using that same flat brush, I'm just going to fill in the bottom part of the boot. Next, I'm going to take a little bit of black and mix it with this burnt umber and get a little bit darker brown to do this heel of our boot. And you could do this black if you wanted to. You could do it any color. I just wanted to pull with that black umber and just make it a little extra dark. So I'm bringing in some black, mixing it really good. And then we'll just fill in those chalk lines. So while that's drying, I'm going to go over here and look at my picture again because I didn't finish chalking out my outline for the other boot. Now this boot looks like it's laying down and you're going to be looking at the bottom of the shoe. So I'm going to try to use my chalk over here and give myself a guide. And again, it doesn't have to be exact. If I can just kind of get the idea of where I want to put things, then I can always tweak it. See how I just used a little sponge on a stick to wipe that off because it wasn't exactly the way I wanted it. If you want to just dab a little water on there, it'll pick up that chalk dust and it works great. So now let me go back in and try to fix it. Again, that's the advantage you guys would have by having a design by line. So this basic outline will already be on your shape and you won't have to worry about chalking things in and placement and things like that. So that's always going to be a lot easier for you guys unless you just want to tackle the challenge of creating something different. So you are totally welcome to do that. Either one works great. The design by line would be really good for kids. It would be really good if you had little girls who liked cowgirl boots and things like that. That way, they already have the basic shape and the idea, and they can just fill it in how they want to. Alright, so there I have my outline. And I'm going to paint this area tan, just like my opposite boot here. I'm just using a smaller flat brush now because this is a much smaller area. I wouldn't need to use one. I mean, the brush I had would have worked just fine. I think I just grabbed this one up because it was the closest one I could get my hands on. But you could use it. I like to get as close as I can to these little edges and try to not make a mess of them. So this little brush will fit in there good. There we go. Now for this one, you'll notice that we don't have anything that's going to be just this burnt umber color. It's the sole of our shoe, so we're going to go ahead and make more of this dark burnt umber by adding black to it because that's all we're going to use on this right shoe. There's not going to be any just plain burnt umber there, except on the little tab that has not been painted up there in the little tan area. And just cover this whole sole of the boot with the burnt umber, the dark burnt umber, the darker color, so that it matches the heel of the left boot. It shouldn't take any time at all. There's no real big details. Just try to get as close to you as you can there and make sure not to smear against that light tan color. If you do, you can always just let it dry and then touch it up. About dropped my brush. You see that? I'm a little clumsy this day. And now we're just going to paint the same, using the same brush and the same color. We're just going to paint this heel. Now I'm going to leave just a tiny little bit of a line to help remind myself where I'm splitting this shoe up, where the heel starts and the rest of the heel and the rest of the sole stops. And the reason I'm doing that is because if I painted all this in the same strokes and the same color, all with one big big brush stroke, I would completely forget where I where I had my outlines, and I'd have to come back in and do them again on top of the paint, and that would be much harder to do because we would leave a lot of chalk dust. So you can see I've left that little area there, and then I got to fix this where I got a little too excited. See there, I got a little too excited with my burnt umber and made a mess. So now I'm trying to clean it up. Accidents happen all the time, you guys, and sometimes you just have to touch it up and then you're good to go. That was easy. I'm just giving this a second coat because I can see a lot of my brush strokes and I want it to be a nice solid color, so just picking up this tan and covering over with a second coat. Try to tidy up that little edge I messed up. There we go. We'll just let that dry. We'll come back and work on it again later once it's dry. So now I'm going to give this plain old burnt umber on the first boot. This tallest boot, we're going to give it a second coat. Because I used most of my burnt umber to mix, I'm going to go ahead and get me some more that's not mixed with the black. There we go. I don't want to risk getting the really dark brown because then I'd have a mess. It would match my heel of my boot and it would look really funny. How are you guys doing? I hope everything's coming along for you well. You guys be sure to go over to Diverse Woodworking's Facebook page and share a picture of your design, of your painting. That's always fun to see how other people's stuff turns out. We would love to see it. Be sure to share it with your friends. And even better, we'd love to see a picture of you painting it or see a picture of it hanging on your door or whatever you ended up doing with it. That's always fun, and I like to hear the stories behind them. A lot of times they're for gifts and baby showers, and those are always fun. Everybody has new creative ideas for these things, so it's always fun to hear how everybody's doing. So you can see there the two different browns and how that reflects. The reason it's reflecting is because the paint's still wet. Once the paint dries, then we'll have that reflective look to it anymore. We fixed that little touch-up spot there. It needed a little touch-up where I smeared it. So we're just going to use the hairdryer and blow it dry and then make sure it looks okay. You can see that sheen disappearing, and the areas that are still wet are a little shiny. That's always fun to watch it disappear. You'll notice I moved my plate back away. You don't want to blow this dry with your paint sitting there just because it makes your paint dry out a lot faster. So we'll go over that little area there that I smudged that paint. We'll go back over it with our burnt umber. So we have a nice solid boot. We're going to give this heel and the sole and the heel of our second boot a second coat. And give all of these colors a second coat. Get rid of all of those paintbrush streaks we can see floating around. Second coats are always so much faster than the first coat, so don't spend too terrible much time on it. It's a whole lot easier to do that than the first time you did it. I love this burnt umber. I think it's such a pretty color. And you put that black in there and you get a really dark brown. It's one of my favorites. You would be surprised at how many different browns there are. So you'll hear me say burnt umber quite a bit because I use that as my go-to brown. Okay, so now we're going to give this light tan a second coat. So I'll rinse my brush really good, make sure I get all that dark color out. Okay. Now we'll just hit this tan area with a second coat, and then we'll move on to the next step. I'll be back in just a few minutes. Okay, I'm back, you guys. I went ahead and blew this dry a little bit. Now let's look at this picture. I'm going to zoom it in so you can see. I've got some swirls, a line down the middle, and some flowers. And we'll leave that on in case we want to reference it here in a minute. Right now I'm going to use my chalk, and I'm going to work on these details that I have up at the top. So there's like a little tab of like dark leather right here on the side. And then we're kind of looking at the boot from an angle, so we've got this little scoop right here as if you can see inside the boot a little bit. And I didn't get it quite the way I wanted it, so we'll wipe that off. I can't talk, you guys. Wipe that off and fix it. There we go. That's got it. And then this is going to be the same little dark leather tab that you see. There'll be one on that side too. Again, that's the advantage you guys have with design by line. You don't have to worry about getting this exactly right. I'm just pretty particular, so I end up taking a little longer than needed, I guess. Alright, now I'm going to try to give myself one little line of the center of the boot. Give myself a guide on where I want to put that teal line. And these are my little swirls, and I'm kind of alternating them. So I go up a little bit on each side. I go up a little bit from the last one. Ta-da! Look how easy that was, you guys. So now this doesn't look exactly like my design, but it's pretty close, and that's what I was going for. As long as we get that ballpark, we're doing okay. So now let's go ahead and get our next color, and it is going to be a Caribbean blue. I think turquoise is going to be our flowers, but the Caribbean blue and maybe mix a little of that brown, see what we think. Because I want it to be a little less blue and have a little tiny bit of that tan in there. It's almost a little bit green. And that brown really gave me the color I wanted. Did you see how that changed? Alright, so now I've got my brush and got my greenish blue here. I picked up a bigger brush because I wanted to make sure I had a nice thick line. See how I've got my wide flat brush? I'm just going to pull that line straight down all the way to my burnt umber. And then we're going to try to make our swooshes, our little circles. And see, that line is not perfect, but that's okay because we're going to come back over it with some flowers in a little bit. You won't even notice it. And this here, all I'm doing is turning my brush. So I'm starting with that flat side and I'm just turning my brush to follow the chalk outline. Once we get to that part there at the very end, there's a really big turn right there at the end. I suggest that you take some paper and you practice this before you go over here and try to paint your piece. Just because that does take a little practice getting used to how that swirls. And of course this one's going to be a little different because we've got this edge up here we're working with, but those bottom three, just practice on some paper and get the idea of what your hand has to do and kind of get that muscle memory on what you're trying to do. It's so much easier once you do that. We're going to try to do that same thing over here on the left-hand side of the boot. Just start with that thick end and turn your brush as you go along. It's so easy. Once you figure out how to do your hand, how to twist your wrist and all that, then it's super easy. Look, that was so fast. I'm just going to cover down that straight line again, just to get those areas where the swirls met the center line. I wanted that line to be straight, a little bit more solid, a little less having clumps of paint in it. So I'll just go over that. So now you can see in my design I've got the dots all the way around. I'm going to go and pick up this sponge, and I'm not going to use the sponge side. I'm going to use the stick side. You can see how these have, so the sponges are great, but the sticks also make really great dots. So I will do some big dots and then I'll switch over and do some small dots up here in this little smaller area. That'll also create a little illusion of distance. So you'll see I put the stick down on the wood and then I kind of swirl it just a pinch. You just move it just ever so slightly, and that helps, number one, get the paint off of your stick without leaving bumps, and two, it also gives you a nice perfect circle. If you have too much paint, then you'll get a little lumpy bumpy. That one didn't have enough paint. I got some little weird dry paint on the bottom, so let's fix that. So we'll just go right back over that and then just kind of smear it a little bit. Look, it's turning out great. If you guys have never seen any of the videos I do, then you're going to learn I like dots. I like doing dots a lot. I don't know why, they just look so fun and playful, and they're so easy to do. So now I'm going to pick up this little smaller stick, and I'm going to fill in some of this space that got weird right here, but I'm also going to put dots that are smaller. Let me finish filling these in. All I'm doing right here is smoothing these out. Now I'm going to pick this up and I'm going to make kind of a medium circle, kind of in between my first circle size and my tiniest circle size. And you can see I'm just going down just ever so slightly, and then the further away I get up into that smaller area, I'm going to make much smaller dots that are more the size of the stick that I'm making dots with. You'll see here in a second. There you go. See how I'm not moving that stick around to make the stick make a bigger dot? I'm just trying to hold it a little more still, and that's giving me a much better dot, one that's more consistent with the size of the stick. So it's smaller than my big dots, and it just kind of tapers down into a smaller dot from the big ones. Now right here I still had some paint that was wet, so I didn't want to make a mess in that, so I'll come back and do a little work on that in a little while. Right now I'm tickled with what I've got. So now let's come over here to our picture again and see what we've got. We're going to paint that burnt umber, the same color as the bottom. That's just giving this other stuff some time to dry before we go do any more work with it. So we've got this little leather tab on both boots, so we need to make sure we do both boots. Now at this point we're going to go ahead and paint the inside of the boot, and I'm just picking up that darker, the burnt umber mixed with the black. We're just going to fill this little area in with the same color as the sole and the heel of our boot. Let's go ahead and hit this with the hair dryer so we can make sure everything's good and dry before we move on. So it looks like that teal area is dry, so we're going to go back over it with a second coat just to make sure it's nice and vibrant and we don't see any brush strokes. And don't forget, right here, we're just turning that brush, and don't forget you can always go practice again before you try to go over these lines. Feel free to get a piece of paper and just practice that stroke. All done. So now we're going to hit this with the hair dryer again and make sure all of that teal is dry. So we're going to come in and add our flowers. So now I'm picking up this turquoise, and I'm going to go over here and just add some little circles throughout this boot area. And all I'm doing is swirling that brush around much like I was when I created those initial swirls. And this is just a big circle with a brush with a few little humps around it. And we're just going to alternate the flowers. We don't want them to be all straight up and down. We're just going to have a little bit off to the right and a little bit off to the left. While those flowers are drying, we'll pick up this liner brush and use some of this turquoise, and we're just going to go back in here over these spirals, and we're going to just add some highlights. Now I'm doing this on the bottom of our circle areas. It's going to be almost like a little shadow. I said highlight, but what I really meant was a little bit more of a shadow. So now I've picked up some of the lighter greenish color that we started with, and I'm just adding alternating half circles throughout our flower petals to help them stand out a little bit. I know right now it's hard to tell because of the glare, but I'll hold this up in a minute and you can see it. It's really, really pretty. So now that we've got our shadows done and our flowers are drying, we're going to take this white and we're going to just kind of include it a little bit throughout parts of these swirls. I'm trying to reference my picture to see where I put them on my digital version. Now, the trick about wispies is number one, practice on some paper, but number two, it's all about the pressure that you're using with the brush. So if you use very light pressure, you're going to have a very thin line and a line that's a little bit broken. If you use heavy pressure, you're going to have a fat line. Now the fun thing I like about the wispies is that I can vary the pressure, and I do it without even thinking about it, because I've done it so much. But the more you practice on paper, you'll get the hang of it. So you start out with a little bit of pressure, and then the pressure gets heavier and lighter at the end, and then you just, as you're lifting up around the circle, you just lift your hand up off of it, and that's how you get the varying widths of your line. And it again is something that just comes with lots of practice, and even then sometimes I mess them up. So please, by all means, I recommend, if you want to get better at it, if it's something you're struggling with, just grab some paint and a piece of copy paper or notebook paper even, and you'll get the hang of it in no time. It's one of my most favorite things to do on my paintings. I think it's fun. Okie doke. So now we've got that done. Look how pretty that looks, you guys. I love it. We're going to bring the white in to our flowers now. And we're going to do basically the same thing we did with the lighter green, but we're just going to spread it out throughout our flower, here and there, no right or wrong, just alternating little circles, or half circles here and there, to give it the idea of some flower petals. So my white paint was getting a little thick, so I just took a little time and watered it down a little bit more, and that helps it flow much better off of your brush. Once it starts getting thick, you just have a really hard time making cute wispies with thick paint. There we go. So now I want to move down here to do these circles, but they're wet, so I'm going to wait. I'm going to go ahead and add my white to the bottom of the boot, to this heel, and that way it'll give those dots a little more time to dry. I don't want to mess with them till they're more dry. And since I still have plenty of things to do, I can let that dry naturally without using the hairdryer, and we can just move on to the next pieces. As you can see, I'm just taking this liner brush and making a little line across my boot that matches my design that I have on my phone. And I did that on my iPad, so I did it ahead of time so I kind of have an idea of what I wanted to do. Now, if you've seen any of my stuff, you know sometimes my plan changes right smack in the middle of the project, so don't be surprised if they don't match exactly. So now these are dry a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and risk it. I'm just going to take this small brush and do like a backwards half circle on the right hand side of these dots, just to give it a highlight. And I'm just keeping it consistent throughout the entire row of dots. Keeping it on the same side. Trying my best to not smudge any paint by resting my hand on it. So what looks to you guys like I'm resting my hand, I'm really not. I'm still holding my hand up, or I'm propping my pinky out to try to brace myself. So be very, very mindful that you're not resting your hand in wet paint, because you will have a mess. So I'll move along now and pick up a little bit of black, and I'm going to go ahead and try to give my boot a little bit of an outline where my pretty burnt umber meets the dark burnt umber, where the heel meets the actual leather of the boot. Try to give that a little bit of a line. I didn't like how little that last one was, so now I'm going to bring this all the way around, and it's going to look like the bottom part of the boot. You know how there's always that little rim around the boot? It's like the sole of the boot. You can see it sticking out up here at the top of this boot, at the tip. So this black is going to be that little tip right there. It's just a simple little detail, but it really brings the entire boot to life. It really gives it a finished look. I would have never guessed that just one simple little black line down to the tip would really make that much difference, but it really does, you guys. I'm just taking my time trying to get a nice thick line as straight as I can. Anywhere I don't feel like I like it, I'm just going back over it. So while I'm working with the black and in the liner brush, I'm just going to start doing some of my outlines. Finishing out my outlines. That one got a little bit weird, but I was trying to not rest my hand on top of wet paint, so that's why it got weird. We'll come back and fix it. It's okay to turn this any direction you need to just to get the better angle. You'll notice that sometimes it's a lot easier to pull the brush towards you or to push the brush away from you, depending on what what shape you're trying to create. So feel free to turn this around any way you need to. I'm trying to fatten this line up here where I messed up a second ago. There we go. Now no one will ever know. That is looking great. I hope you guys can see it okay. So now I'm going to work over here on this other boot. Remember, I left myself that little guide so I knew where the heel would end. I'm so glad I left myself that guide. So now I'm trying to remember what my design looked like. So I'm going to bring this all the way around. And I don't know if you can see on my design, but I've got some cute little stitching that I'm going to do on the bottom of this boot to tie it together with the other boot. So you'll notice now I'm fixing to try to do my outline along this tan part of the boot. And normally I would make really cute wispies and be very carefree with them. But I really want this to look sharp, so I'm going to make a really sharp edge of black around the outside of this boot. And just take your time because you're going to want to keep that line as consistent as possible. So now we're going to work on this side. I'm going to make sure that's dry before I go any further. And just dab my hand. There we go. Yeah, it's dry enough. It's fine. Otherwise, you'd have some smears. So now we're going to just do that same outline on this side of the boot and being as consistent as possible. I hope yours is coming along great. I am super excited about mine. I'm tickled with it. I really like those solid lines. I feel like these boots look really sharp. All right, so we're going to give just a couple little black lines across the bottom of the heel on the right boot. And that's drying. I'm not sure you can see it very well. I'm going to touch up just down here where I made a little smudge with my white. Try to cover that up a little bit. Now you're going to think I've lost my mind, but because I want this to look really sharp, I'm going to take this burnt umber or the black and I'm going to outline each of these circles with my very, very tiny liner brush. It's going to take some time, but I promise in the end you're going to be really glad you did it, because by giving these outlines, it makes everything look very polished and finished. So like I said, you can take this or you cannot do this. Either way, this is up to you. It's your piece. So since I'm working on it, it's going to take a little time. So I'm going to fast forward this section of the video and we'll meet back up when you're ready and I'm done with these dots, okay? So my dots are done. Now I'm going to move on to doing this same design on the right boot, because I didn't do that over here. Partly because I forgot, but also because I'm going to have to do this with a much smaller brush, and I'm really going to try to be very careful to make sure I don't mess it up. So I just was saving it to the end. So I'm going to use this very small angle brush, and I'm going to pick up that same color, and I'm going to do the same thing that I did on the other boot. It's just going to be a little bit smaller version. So that brush was almost a little too thick for my swirl, so I'm going to dry this and then I'm going to pick up a smaller brush to do my opposite swirl. So you'll see here, I'm trying to use this much smaller brush. This is my liner brush, and I'm just going to try to make it a thick line with my liner brush because I got a little big with that last one. Now I'm just going to pick up this turquoise and make a little flower on the bottom of this boot. And it's just the same as our last flowers. We're going to do the exact same thing. Now that we have our flower on, I'm going to pick up this liner brush and pick up white, and I'm going to do just little tiny lines around the bottom of this boot. It's going to look like the stitching of the boot. So you're just going to follow that same outline all the way around to the heel. So we're going to not do the heel. We're going to start at the heel and we're going to finish at the heel. So in the space that I left in between the white, I'm going to put this same little turquoise green color that we have on our main design. It's going to be a much smaller little line. I'm just going to fill in between those white ones with that green, just to give it a little something different, just to bring a little more color into this side of the boot, because that tall boot is so pretty and so colorful, and then this little one over here is just a little bit bland, and I'm trying to add a little life to it. Look how cute that is. I love that. So while I still got my liner brush, I'm going to work on this flower, just giving some alternating half circles to give it a little bit of detail around our petals. Careful not to rest your hand in those lines you just painted. We're going to hit this heel real quick with a little bit of white, just like we did our other heel. We're just going to give it a little white highlight here and there to help it stand out. And then I'm just going to go over these lines. They dried and you can't really see them, so I wanted to help them stand out a little bit. We're going to bring in our finishing touches as our white highlights throughout the rest of our boot. You guys, this is turning out so good. This would look really good too as like a black boot with red flowers and some red swirls. That'd be really pretty. You can just think of all kinds of different designs to do with this. Alright, so I'm going to give this little swirly some of those highlights and shadows and a little flower. This is really teeny on this side compared to the other side was so big. So I'm not even waiting for it to dry because nobody's going to see that detail very much. We just want to give the idea that we completed that boot and tried to make that design match our main design. So you don't have to put a tremendous amount of attention into these small details. You just want to give it that basic idea. Just tying it all up with a nice little bow. Finishing off our little flower petals. That looks so cute, you guys. And I forgot to outline my little leather tab, so we're going to go ahead and do that now. So while I'm outlining, I'm going to go ahead and outline this little tan part of our boot. And then, once I'm done with that, we're going to move on to outlining the teal design on our left boot. And that's going to take some time. And again, it's like these dots. You're going to think, ugh, really? But I promise it's going to make everything pop. Even as much as you like your design right now, trust me, when you get done with this part, you're going to absolutely love it. So now, I'm going to flip it around, and I'm going to work with this little tiny liner brush, and I'm going to work on doing some little wisps here and there to outline this design and tie it all up. So, and make it look as sharp as the rest of our boot, because I feel like our boot's looking great, but this middle part needs a little bit of something. So you can see here, I'm not giving super tight, solid lines. I'm just giving little wispies here and there to help our flowers pop up off of that bottom design and to help tie this design into the rest of our boot that has some black outline. Look how that is coming together. This is always the part I get to and I think, oh man, really? I'm so tired already. But trust me, don't give up. Don't give up right before you're done. Just hang in there and do this little piece with me and it's going to turn out beautiful. It just gives it such a finished, polished look. I'm always very glad I did it once I'm finished. Just some quick little wispies. Can you guys tell how the bottom part of that design pops so much more than the top that doesn't have that black outline? It's amazing to me how it always comes together like that. Because I was pretty happy with it before I added the black, but now I absolutely love it. You're halfway there. You got one side down. Now we're going to work on the other side. Just hang in there and we'll meet back up in a minute. Now we're so close to finished. We're going to take some of this black and we're going to do those same wispies and those same outlines here on our flower on the right boot that's on the sole of our boot. And then we're going to add a little bit of a white highlight and finishing touch to the outside of this boot on this side. And the reason we're doing that is because it still needs a little something to finish this one off. You can put words there. That's what I was trying to show you before I stuck my finger in the paint, was you can put words. On my design, on the digital design, I had a little saying there, something about boots. But I'm going to leave it like this because I really like it. It's simple, subtle, and it's really pretty. So let me add this last little finishing touch to our boot and we'll be all done, you guys. And this one's going to be like a white outline. just because that's such a hard black line. I wanted to give the sole of our boot just a little bit of pizzazz, because we lose it a little bit if we're not careful. Because the left side of this design is so colorful and bright and vibrant, we want to try to meet that same level of vibrance by adding just a little bit here and there to finish off this little boot. Alright, you guys, we are done. Thank you so much for watching. I had an absolute blast painting this boot. I love it. It is one of my all-time favorites. I hope you guys had a great time. I hope it helped a lot. And feel free to like and subscribe, and that way you'll get notifications on any future posts. Thanks so much again for watching. I hope you had a great time. We'll see you next time.